Today on CityCast Philly. That's the powerful sounds of the Crossing Choir, a multi Grammy Award winning chamber choir. I'm speaking with this decorated Philly ensemble about their secret sauce to setting a record with 10 consecutive Grammy nominations. It's Wednesday, December 4th. I'm Trinine Uri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Joining me today is Donald Nally, conductor of The Crossing, Nate Barnett, tenor, and Chelsea Lyons, alto, and the community engagement manager. Thank you all so much for being here on CityCast Philly.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Before we get started, congrats on getting a 10th Grammy nomination this year. How do you feel?
It's kind of surreal. We record a lot. We do many albums each year, and it's truly a labor of love. And I can't say why it's turned out this way, but it's just exciting to see our work be celebrated like that.
Chelsea, what about you?
It really is thrilling. I mean, we have been so fortunate to get to celebrate every year for the past several years, being nominated and getting this spotlight put on our work. And truly, the best part about it is our art reaching an audience that it might not otherwise reach, or even just a wider expanse of our same audience, connecting with new people and getting to share our work with them.
Well, this group is no stranger to a Grammy. You've got three. What's the secret sauce for getting this most decorated award in the music industry?
Well, there isn't one. We do release a lot of albums because we commission so much music, and we're really committed to recording the commissions, the new works, with the composer in the room. So we actually make a literal record of what they wanted it to sound like. And so we do that a lot, and we release a lot of albums, but we don't really pursue the nominations or the awards. Like, we kind of let the universe decide that kind of stuff for us.
I have one thought, which is, some groups do all kinds of music, anything under the sun. And we are a pretty specialized group, which is that we only sing really new music, meaning music that's written by living composers and primarily music that we commission. So I do think there's an extent to which we've become known within the community as people who are really dedicated to this very important aspect of our art. And so that's possibly why, people are regularly, giving us this acknowledgement, is that they recognize the work we're doing in that domain.
And you guys are based in Philly, but there is this really special sound to your music. I kind of describe it when I was listening to the latest album. It's soulful in a way. A lot of people might be familiar with like the soulful sounds of like Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, but The Crossing is soulful in a different way. How would you describe it, Chelsea?
I think the soulfulness really is our souls. Our ensemble is made up of a bunch of friends. I mean, it started 20 years ago as a group of friends who just wanted to get together and sing beautiful music. And that culture has persisted over these past couple decades, and I think is absolutely palpable in the music that we make together. We also, aside from really liking one another, we also are really unified in our mission and our aesthetic and our vision. And we work really hard to come together to be able to put our souls out there in music for people to hear.
Now, friends sometimes have disagreements, so how do you work out those kinks?
There's definitely an intimacy there that, of course, when you're close with people, that makes it easier to come up with conflict. But I think that through our vulnerability with one another, we also have an openness and always at the core a willingness to listen. And so we have open conversations with one another. We go on tour together. We spend weeks at a time together, sometimes overseas. And so absolutely those personal relationships are part of what we do, but it's through those connections, whether they are challenging or perfectly harmonious, that we are able to be close with one another and be vulnerable in our music making.
Is that where that layering comes from? Because that's what I hear in some of that richness. Where does that layering come from in your songs?
We talk a lot about listening, and Donald is constantly talking to us about how we need to be using our ears in the room when we're making music together more than any other part of our lives. And I do think that really allows us to access these kind of higher levels of music making where we are, not just making sounds, but sort of making magic in a room together. And it really does feel that way sometimes, that we're like accessing this kind of thing that's bigger than any of us is really able to do elsewhere.
Donald, can you speak on the layering? Where does that come from? Or where does the lesson that you're trying to convey to the ensemble of maybe doing active listening?
Well, yeah. So, I liked your question about how friends have disagreements. Because, it is like listening creates trust. Chelsea mentioned that we go on tour and we spend like a week together or 2 weeks together or whatever. What I'm amazed about is that we go on tour and we spend 2 weeks together and we finish rehearsal and everybody still goes to the same bar, or we get up and everybody's still having breakfast together. And you're going like, oh my God, how can these people like each other so much? Which is really a gift. Like, it's really incredible. So there's a level of trust that in the music making where you really feel, because I like big voices and voices that can really open up, but often choose not to. And you can hear that in the sound. But when there's a moment in the pieces that we do, because we do a lot of social justice issues, and there's a moment when, they're just going to yell and be angry or call out and, in a declamatory way and just ask for something, they know how to like just put their 2 feet on the ground together and make that happen as a full out ensemble. And that sound sometimes is the most extraordinary thing to be conducting, because there's all this emotional range. I also like people with a huge emotional range, which sometimes make my life kind of complicated, but that's okay. So there's this huge emotional range coming at you. And as Chelsea said, that comes from also a level of trust and intimacy. Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, more with The Crossing. I want to talk about the latest project. There's Shift by Ayanna Woods. Then there's A Cluster of Instincts, which was written by George E. Lewis. And then you have Ochre by Caroline Shaw. What's the story behind the Ochre project?
So I'll just really quickly say these are just 3 different pieces that we've commissioned, but they're all incredibly different. And I love how they fit together to make an album.
Well, I'm going to speak to Ayanna Woods' music because actually we went to school together. And so I knew Ayanna. We were in the same year in college, and she draws on a lot of different influences. But I would say that her music is just extremely like instinctual and rooted in how she performs and how she sings. Like, it's calls on us to use a lot of our bodies and to make a lot of strange sounds you wouldn't necessarily expect in quote unquote classical music. So she has this groaning and yelling and doing weird things with our mouths, but it's this extremely effective way of making music that really pushes us to, explore sound and what it means for us to be singing.
That's cool to work with your friend from college.
Well, now she's a big time composer, and I'm privileged to get to talk to her.
Chelsea, what about for you?
So I can also talk about Ayanna's piece. It's actually the only piece on this album that I sang on and am like intimately familiar with. So we commissioned the piece during the COVID-19 lockdown, and then we didn't record it, I think, until 2021. So I live in Chicago, and this recording session where we recorded Shift was the first time I had been back singing with The Crossing since the world shut down. And it was incredibly meaningful for me to get back in the room with these people who I love, who I have such an emotional intimacy with, making this impactful recording of this incredible piece of music, which truly, as Nate mentioned, has a wide variety of musical and vocal and emotional demands throughout the piece. I mean, it's not an incredibly long piece, but it is incredibly wide ranging in its colors and textures and dynamic, and truly it's a tour de force of music.
Why do we build monuments? How Why do we build pyramids?
Getting to do that in the room with my friends who I hadn't seen in a couple of years was really, really special. And going back and listening to this recording now, I can hear that. I can hear the joy that we all felt being back in the room together to record this piece that we love so much.
I want to play an excerpt from A Cluster of Instincts.
Concentration is interrupt. And
There's like this hissing I hear, this inhaling, exhaling. I mean, what's happening here?
A Cluster of Instincts is based on Mimi Berssenbrugge's poem Fog. And in this particular section of that poem that George Lewis said, this person is having a conversation with themselves in their mind and keeps referring to themselves as she in this other pronoun, and is just thinking about like their emotional life as opposed to the way the universe works. There's this amazing moment in which she describes how like just suddenly, because of the universe, like the timing is right for snow to melt off of a branch and spring up, you know? And so George set this poem a little bit more madrigalesque than I thought, and I love it. But what I mean by that is it's very descriptive, as you point out. It's got all these sounds in it, and the sounds capture everywhere from confusion to fog to excitement. So what we just heard was your concentration is interrupted, and of course he writes it in these chords that are intricately woven. They're so tightly. So that is in a nutshell what's going on. It's like a journey into like, who am I, in a really beautiful way. It's a great poem, and I think George is an incredible piece. This piece is for 24 individual voices. So we're a 24 voice choir, and every single person in the piece is singing their own line.
I want to add one thing as a singer, which is I was there for the premiere of this, which actually took place in a barn. I'm trying to remember, Donald, was that in Bucks County?
Yeah, it was near Newtown.
Yeah, and it's this barn on this farm that, you know, this young couple is starting to turn into like an art space, and we've done a few performances there. But what was so crazy was that this piece actually has us in 3 choirs. So it's 24 voices, but we're divided into 3 groups of 8. And we were actually, those 3 choirs were placed around the barn such that there were actual wooden walls between us as we were doing this. So, you know, on top of this being like pretty harmonically complicated and having all these crazy effects, we were also listening to each other through these wooden walls. It was a truly insane experience, but honestly, it worked really well. And I feel like I can still hear some of that in the recording. The kind of wildness of that experience it has like persisted. So it's pretty cool to hear that.
Why did you put a wood barrier in between the 3 groups of 8 singers? I mean, is it to challenge yourselves? Like, what is it about that?
So I suppose I'm the only person that can answer that question since I made that decision. So the barn, it's the upper level of a Pennsylvania bank barn. And so it's in the classic form that barn is always going to be. I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, so it's in my head. And so it basically has, you know, you walk in and there's wooden walls on either side, and then it opens up into 2 side rooms and kind of a main front room. And so there's open space, and the audience can experience it they can see all 3 choirs, but the choirs can't necessarily see each other because of the positioning of the walls. So we're basically relying on the acoustic of the barn for the whole thing to come together. And I wouldn't have done it that way if it didn't work, but it worked really well.
That's great. All right. So in my research, I checked out your performance on Tiny Desk, and that's where I kind of fell in love. And you just talked about it, you know, this performance at the barn. But in the Tiny Desk concert, there was like this dramatic performance sprinkled in there too. I mean, your facial expressions, hand movements, even things that were happening with your mouths. So, is that a part of what defines the crossing?
Sometimes, the piece in particular, Sharanova's titration, she wrote into the piece facial expressions and like emotional states of being. She wanted us to dig really deep and sing with those emotions, which sometimes we do, as exemplified in our tiny desk, and as we just discussed in A Cluster of Instincts. And other times, like in the music of David Lang, which is frequently stoic or sort of emotionally detached on purpose, we have to do the exact opposite. And these things are equally challenging for different reasons. I mean, you could come into a rehearsal of David Lang's music that is needs to be perfectly straight and serene and tranquil, while deep down personally you're dealing with some kind of stress, or you know your dog puked on your carpet right before you had to leave for rehearsal, and so you're like worried about cleaning up the mess when you get home, and yet you have to like get into this mindset of being totally calm and still.
How do you get into that mindset?
Make sure I get to rehearsal early. Make that transition time as make it as regular as possible. Get to rehearsal 10 minutes early and make sure that I can make sort of a mental transition out of whatever it is that I've been doing during the day, and into the mindset that I need to be in to make art, to listen actively, to be open and flexible as a musician. It's quite demanding, but it's also in so many ways and so frequently a reprieve from the grind of our daily life and chores and the mundane stuff that we all have to deal with as citizens of planet Earth. We get to escape that for a little bit in music, and it's a gift to get a chance to do that. But it does take some intention to successfully do that.
It's interesting because, you were kind of saying this earlier, Donald, that, the group isn't afraid to address some of those social, environmental issues that are happening. So, how do you take your own personal life, but also you're trying to make a point within the music that you're making on these bigger issues happening around us?
I think that ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by storytelling and kind of became a storyteller organically through reading and watching people around me. And I tend to surround myself with people who are storytellers, singers who are, it's very instinctive for them to approach song or opera or whatever, as a story to be told. So I say that because, I approach a lot of our work in a kind of journalistic way. When we approach one of these difficult topics, you know, I'm in a way I'm commissioning a piece that's sort of reporting on the world we live in and what it's like to be here. And maybe someday that piece will become a piece that says this was what it was and this is how it felt to be there. And so in that, to be more specific to the answer to your question, Chelsea was very astutely talking about the different ways in which we have to react to different composers' styles. And there's a line in any piece of music where you need to have a boundary emotionally about your personal issues and your personal life, your personal viewpoints. We tend not to answer any of the questions. We just report on the questions. And that line, you can either tell the story or you can be the story. And if you are the story, then there's not room enough for other people to hear their relationship, to determine their relationship to the story, because you're just living the story. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in telling the story. And that's where that line is.
Sounds like the work I do.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Nate, how do you see all this in terms of, your work on the crossing?
Well, it's funny. You asked us about our performance style and how sometimes, there is more drama in how we're presenting it and sometimes there's less. It actually feels related to how Donald was talking about singers and how he likes singers with big voices, but oftentimes we're not really using all of them. And that actually feels a lot to me like how the whole performance comes out, which is that we are all people who have this really, I think we have big personalities typically, and we do have big voices, and we care a lot about this stuff. And also we recognize that if you use all of the tools at your disposal all at once, it will just sound like noise. And so we're constantly deciding how much of my body, how much of my voice, how much of my face am I going to really deploy right now? And a lot of what we're thinking about is how that's happening as a collective, which is such an interesting, I talked about listening earlier, but it's such an interesting process of thinking like what I'm doing right now is one of 24, 25 if you count Donald. And, my decisions, yes, it's for me, but also it's because I'm reacting to this kind of collective thing that we're creating. And depending, sometimes we really let loose and it's super exhilarating and really fun and crazy. And then sometimes we're holding back because that just today seems like what is going to tell that story the best. And that's very satisfying too, I will say, because sometimes you get in a room where everyone's just constantly throwing everything at the wall and it just does sound like noise. And I don't think we make noise. I think we really try to, cull what we do and make really intentional decisions, which just can feel amazing when we do it well.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's have some fun. I've got some rapid fire questions I want to ask each of you. Okay. Favorite place to perform in Philadelphia?
Presbyterian Church of Chestnut Hill. It has the most amazing acoustic ever.
Nate, next.
I love performing at the Icebox, Crane Arts in North Philadelphia.
I've really loved singing at St. Mark's in Rittenhouse Square. The organ there is stunning. It's such a
Nice.
beautiful space.
Okay. Favorite bar or restaurant to hang out with the group after a long performance?
Well, I'm going to win this one because we all go to the same place. So that's the Tavern on the Hill in Chestnut Hill.
Okay, but sometimes, we often do a concert on Rittenhouse Square for Christmas, and after that, we will go to Park together and have a nice drink, and it's really lovely.
We do also sometimes roll further down the hill on Germantown Avenue and go to Iron Hill Brewery if we've gotten out a little earlier and want to have dinner.
Great places. Okay. All right. So where can folks see you next?
Easy enough. We are doing Poor Hymnal, David Lang's Poor Hymnal, which is a piece that was written and premiered last December, and we never reprise anything. So many audience members said to me, I want to hear this right again. I want to hear it again. And we knew that our album of it was going to come out this December, so we decided to bring it back because it's a very, very special piece. And I suspected that the political environment in the country might mean that we could really use a piece that is quiet and asking us to think about the other in a really special way. So we're bringing that back. We'll do it at St. Mark's Church on Friday, December 20. Then we take it to New York, to Lincoln Center at Alice Tully Hall on Saturday, December 21st. And then on Sunday, December 22nd at 5 p.m., we take it to our home venue, which is, in fact, the Presbyterian Church of Chestnut Hill. And it's not just because of the acoustic that we love being there. We also love the community. The parishioners at that church are really much a part of the community of the Crossing. So
That's great. Donald, Nate, Chelsea, thank you so much for speaking with me on CityCast Philly.
thanks for having us.
Thanks. It's fun.
This was so much fun. Thanks for having us.
As we head out, this is Vivian Night. Ochre is available as a digital download and on streaming platforms. You can watch the 67th Grammy Awards on Sunday, February 2nd, 2025. Good luck. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode with the Crossing Choir, tell a friend. Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye. Is this pronounced Vivian Night? No, you guys are looking at me like, huh? Okay, you know what I'm saying?
Spell it for me.
Vivianite.
Yeah.
Vivian Night?
Yeah.
And
Is that one of the movements of Ochre?
Nate, am I saying it right?
Yeah. I was
Okay.
Yes.
Maybe we can add this for the bloopers.
Did we record a piece called? Yes, it's one of the movements of ochre.